Welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, and welcome to my first lens review in my normal lens tournament. Two lenses from Group 1, the number 1 seed, the Nikkor 50mm 1.4Z, versus the number 12 seed, the Fujinon 55mm 2.2, and two lenses from Group 2, the number 1 seed, the Canon 50mm 1.4 new FD, versus the number 12 seed, the Yashinon 50mm 1.9. For an explanation of my test method, watch my video introduction to my lens tournament. I will put a link in the description below to this video. We will begin with the Nikkor 50mm 1.4 versus the Fujinon in a minute, but I just want to explain a couple things that I did not mention in my first video. The picture control on the Z8 was set to neutral. I took an incident reading to determine exposure, and of course the camera was set for manual exposure control, and the distance from the focal plane on the camera to the mannequin head was 8.5 feet. One last thing. I know there are many great lenses not in this tournament, but I can only test lenses I have access to. Also, these are all very affordable lenses. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the number 1 and the number 12 seed in the first group, the Nikkor 50mm 1.4 Z mount, which is the newest lens in this comparison, and the Fujinon 55mm 2.2, which is the number 12 seed. So let's start with a specification comparison between the two lenses. The Nikkor was introduced in 2024 and the Fujinon in 1975, so they're almost 50 years apart. The Nikkor is an autofocus lens, but of course you could also focus manually, where the Fujinon is a manual focus lens. Lens mount, it's Nikon Z. The Fujinon is the M42 screw mount. The Nikkor has 10 elements in 7 groups. The Fujinon 4 elements in 4 groups. The Nikkor has 9 aperture blades. The Fujinon has 5. The Nikkor focuses down to 1.22 feet or 0.372 meters. The Fujinon at 2 feet or 0.6 meters. Weight, it's a big difference in weight. The Nikkor weighs 14.9 ounces. Also 422 grams, where the Fujinon is 5.47 ounces or 155 grams. The Nikkor takes a larger filter, a 62 millimeter, and the Fujinon a 49 millimeter filter. As far as focus direction, it's changeable on the Nikkor. You could focus, if you're focusing manually, in either direction, where the Fujinon focuses in the Nikon Pentax direction. So what does this mean? Just real quick, lenses either focus one way or the other, manual focus lenses. There's the Leica, Minolta, Canon direction, and then there's a Nikon Pentax direction. And so if you're going from one lens to the other, it can get a little confusing. So that's why I mentioned that. As far as the aperture, the Nikkor goes from 1.4 to f16 in either 1/3 or half stops, which is settable on the camera, where the Fujinon goes from 2.2 to f16 in full stops. The Nikkor, being a modern lens, is multi-coated. I don't believe the Fujinon is. As far as build quality, I think the Nikkor has it. It does have a lot of plastic, but it's high quality plastic. There's also a lot of metal in it, where the Fujinon looks to be mostly plastic. The lens mount seems to be metal, but it just seems very cheaply made, very lightweight. Okay, now let's look at both lenses wide open. All these images, not these images actually, the original images. These images were cropped to fit 2 on the screen at the same time, but all the original images are available for download. Just look in the description below for a link to those images. Now here we have the Nikkor at 1.4 on the left and the Fujinon on the right. There's no question here that the Nikkor is sharper both in the center and out to the edges. But you will also note that the Nikkor has more vignetting. Of course, we're comparing 1.4 to 2.2. And now we are going to look at the Nikkor at 2.0 and the Fujinon at 2.2. And it's just better contrast, better sharpness. Nikkor is very sharp, even out to the edges. Here we are in the center at 2.0 on the left for the Nikkor and 2.2, I'm sorry, on the right for the Fujinon. And again, the Fujinon just is not as sharp as the Nikkor. It doesn't have the same contrast. And here we go to 2.8 for both lenses in the center. And again, you could see, just not even zoomed into this, you could see the better contrast on the Nikkor. And now we're going to look at the left side at 2.8, and out to the edge, the Nikkor is sharper. And you will see this much better on the downloadable images. Now we're going to go to f4 in the center. Same thing, really. It's pretty much the same story throughout. Now, remember, we're looking at lenses that are 50 years apart. Okay, the Fujinon is from 1975, the Nikkor from 2024. Here we are at the left side at 4.0. Excuse me, the right side at 4.0. And again, just look at the mannequin face and you could see. Now, you may like this look for portraits with the Fujinon. It's not really sharp. You know, I always soften portraits with my real sharp lenses. Won't have to do that with the Fujinon. And here we are at 5.6 on the left side. The Fujinon improves, of course, as you stop down, but never matches the Nikkor. And finally, we're just going to look at the center here at f8 because it's pretty much the same story at the edges. Nikkor, very sharp, very contrasty. It's not razor sharp. I've seen sharper lenses. I know the 51.8 is sharper. In fact, people say this lens has character similar to the older lenses. I would tend to agree with that assessment. Okay, now we're going to look at bokeh with the Nikkor at 1.4 and the Fujinon wide open at 2.2. And here's where I was really surprised with the Fujinon. The bokeh is pretty nice here. If you look at the bokeh on the lights, the Christmas lights, they're pretty round. There's a difference in color here. Now, these were all shot with auto white balance, and you see it's much warmer. I don't think that has anything to do with bokeh. I'm not sure why that is. But pretty pleasing bokeh on the Fujinon. And here we are at 2.8. Again, the Nikkor is on the left, the Fujinon on the right. And there is a difference here, obviously, at 55 millimeters. The basketball looks a lot bigger, even it's only a 5 millimeter difference. And here we go to f4. Originally, I was just going to test from like wide open to 2.8, but I decided to go, it was easy enough to do, and I decided to go to 5.6. And I think they're pretty close in bokeh. If I had to pick one, not sure. So look at the sample images, which I have included, and let me know what you think about the bokeh on these lenses. Okay, so who wins this matchup? Well, I have to give the nod to the Nikkor. It is sharper, it's much better made, also much more expensive and a much newer lens, better coatings and so forth. But the bokeh, I think they're pretty close. Okay, so the Nikkor moves on to the next round. All right, next in this first video on these lenses, we're going to go compare the Canon 50mm 1.4 new FD, which is seeded 1 in group 2, against the 12th seed, the Yashinon 50mm 1.9 DS. As far as build quality, while I feel the Canon is better made, it does feel kind of plasticky compared to the older Canon lenses. And the Yashinon is, I don't think, build quality is a big difference. It does have a lot of metal in it. Now, two things about this Yashinon. Number one, it is missing the rubber inset on the focus ring. Doesn't have anything to do with quality. And another thing, however, I do notice some haze when looking through the lens with a strong light. And I believe it has affected the image quality, definitely with respect to contrast and probably sharpness as well. Now, I know in my initial video, my introductory video to this tournament, I said that all the lenses optically were in good shape. I missed this lens. I missed looking at this with the strong light, so I apologize for that. But let's continue with this comparison. And now what we're going to do is look at the comparison of the specifications on these lenses. The Canon was introduced in 1979. The Yashinon, I can't find the date of introduction. I believe it's from the mid to late 60s. There's not a lot of information on this lens. Nikon, Canon, Minolta, Olympus, you get a lot of information on these lenses online. I cannot find the date of introduction on this one. They're both manual focus lenses. Lens mount on, of course, the Canon is the Canon FD, where the Yashinon, like the previous lens I reviewed, the Fujinon, is also an M42 screw mount. The Canon has 7 elements in 6 groups. The Yashinon, 6 elements in 5 groups. There's 8 aperture blades on the Canon, 6 on the Yashinon. Minimum focus is 1.5 feet or 0.45 meters on the Canon. The Yashinon is 1.75 feet or 0.5 meters. Weight is pretty similar. The Canon weighs 8 ounces or 235 grams, where the Yashinon is 7.76 ounces or 220 grams. Both lenses take 52 millimeter filters. Both focus in the same direction, the Canon Leica Minolta direction, as opposed to the Nikon Pentax direction. The Canon stops from 1.4 to f22 in half and full stops. The Yashinon goes from 1.9 to f16 in full stops. And the Canon is multi-coated while the Yashinon is not. Okay, so now we're going to look at both lenses, the Canon at 1.4 here on the left, and the Yashinon wide open at 1.9 on the right. Vignetting seems to be very similar, but as I said, and I think part of this is because of that haze on the Yashinon, the Canon is sharper and also more contrast. And here we are looking at, again, at 1.9 and 1.4 towards the center. And again, the Canon is superior here, but again, part of that is because of this haze. Now here we are to the right side and out to the edge. The Canon isn't very sharp towards the edges, but again, we are at 1.4. We don't expect it to be real sharp towards the edges. And now we're at 2.0 on the Canon and still at 1.9 on the Yashinon. And again, you can see that in the mannequin's face, the much better contrast. But again, I think that's partially due to the haze, although you would expect the Canon to be better. It's a much newer lens and is multi-coated. And at the edge, again, you really could see the contrast improvement. Now, another thing to consider, here we are, both lenses at 2.8, but another thing to consider when looking at even new lenses is sample variation. You could have 2 lenses, brand new from the same manufacturer, and one could be better than the other. And when you have used lenses, the other thing that comes into play is how was the lens treated? How has it been stored? So a lot of that you have to take into consideration. So here we are at f4. And again, of course, the Canon is better. It's sharper. And as you get out away from center, the Canon really starts to sharpen up. And at 5.6, there's an improvement with the Yashinon. But again, I apologize. I should have noticed this haze previously before setting this all up. But I think the Canon would have won this battle anyway. It does have a very good reputation. Previous tests of mine with the Canon, I felt it was one of the better, if not the best, 1.4 that I owned. Here we are at f8, and that was before I purchased the Nikon Z mount. So now we're going to go look at bokeh. And here I don't think the haze plays into it as much. Actually, I think they're very close as far as bokeh here. Kind of a little football shape with the Canon, as you could see. And again, the Canon's on the left. The Yashinon is on the right. And the Canon here is at 1.4, again on the left, and the Yashinon at 1.9 on the right. And now we're going to look at the Canon at f2 and the Yashinon at 1.9. And here, I don't know, I kind of like the Canon better at 2.0. It does have more aperture blades, so you might think the bokeh is going to be better as it's more rounded, the more aperture blades. Usually the aperture is more rounded, and here we are at 2.8 with both lenses. The thing that surprises me is the color, how it looks different. Again, we are in auto white balance, so that may play into it. The color looks much better to me on the Canon. Again, see what you think when you look at the original images. Here we are at 5.6. So bokeh-wise, I think the Fujinon is decent, but when it comes to sharpness and contrast, the edge goes to the Canon. And again, of course, a big part of that is the haze, but I think the Canon would have come out on top anyway. And so the Canon lens will move on to the next round. And one other thing about the Canon, a lot of the old, in fact, I think all the old manual focus Canon lenses have half click stops. And I really like lenses that have half click stops. None of the Nikkors did. None of the manual focus Nikkors did, but I really like that about the Canons. Okay, so the Canon moves on, and so does the Nikkor 50mm 1.4. Both lenses will move on to round 2, which will be in several weeks. Next week, I will be doing another 2 lenses from group 1, the number 11 seed and the number 2 seed, and the same thing with round 2. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And any comments or questions are welcome. Please leave them in the comments below. And I will talk to you next time.